I usually run it at 4.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
All right, I wonder,
Is there
can I just send it to you?
yes. Oh, if it's even set up for that. Actually, if you show me the meeting details, copy the invitation. And then just basically open Notepad or whatever you want, and it will show me the magic details.
Okay.
NOT. There it is. Oh, you only have dial. Oh, no, that's right. Meeting ID is 422 951 446. Okay.
Okay.
You can close that one. And close the other one.
Okay.
Okay, so. Very
Recording in progress.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello.
You ready, Belle?
Yes.
Okay.
ahead.
Yeah,
I don't know if you're asking me or Isabel. Okay, there we go.
all right. All right, hi Isabel.
Hello.
We're going to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Board of Directors of the Bolinas Community Public Utility District. Today is February the 19th, 2025. We're meeting at the Bolinas Fire Department. 3 directors are present, and Grace Cadino and Kristen Walker are not present. So with that, I will move to item 3 on the agenda. The subject matter of the special meeting is about net zero electricity, when there's going to be a presentation by Isabel Winstead and Jefferson County representatives. So with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to you, Isabel.
Hi. Yeah, I think that there might have been some confusion on the agenda
Turn
because
up
we
the volume a
updated
little.
with. Okay.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
So sorry to do this.
Yeah.
I'm talking because they had asked us to turn down the volume because it's really loud across the way. So yeah, where their
Gotcha.
like sleeping quarters are. Yeah, so we're just gonna,
Understandable.
yeah, if you can, and maybe, yeah, can you talk again?
Yeah, of course. So I think that there might be a bit of an error with the agenda because I ended up deciding that Barbara Hale, who is presenting from San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and her expertise surrounding PG or SF Public Utilities Commission, exploring independence from PG&E, better aligns with our goals of exploring public power in Bolinas, and sort of how that looks conceptually. So she actually has prepared a presentation about San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and their experience, again, exploring independence from PG&E, which would parallel Bolinas Public Utility District's potential to expand to electric services, because there's a lot of very similar concepts that I'm going to pitch in and point out for the board's understanding throughout her presentation.
Great, so do you,
It's my turn.
yeah, Isabel, you ready, or did you want to give any formal introduction, or?
Yeah, so Barbara Hale is from San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and she's been working with them as they've been exploring independence from PG&E as well over the last couple of years. And her presentation, we spoke about it I think last week, a week and a half ago, and I noticed a lot of parallels between San Francisco Public Utilities Commission's journey to independence and what Bolinas would experience if they decided to move forward with this. And I think it's a great way of exploring public power concepts to help familiarize the board, which I know it was one of our goals after I presented last November.
Thank you, Isabel.
Let me
I want to
know.
make sure I do this properly. Okay, well, yeah, I think it'll stay, the presentation will stay with the white boundary around it, so.
Do you want? I thought I was gonna maximize it
Does
for you.
Oh, okay, however works best for.
I can see that. I can see the towers and
That's great. I'm just trying to.
Market Street.
Hide the floating medium control.
Familiar?
Yeah.
That's better, yeah. That's all great.
Great.
Okay, let me just see if I can advance this properly.
Is it gonna let you?
Which button should I be using, Georgia?
Guessing this, but I
Okay,
don't,
I just tried that. and it
Okay,
Didn't
you
advance, so let
might-
me try this. Nope.
yeah, I haven't used,
I can stand over here and just use the,
sorry.
You want me to do the same thing? No, thanks.
Okay.
do that over too. So I'm Barbara Hale. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Power at the San Francisco PUC. And as Isabel mentioned, we've been engaged in an effort to take responsibility for the electric grid in San Francisco. It's been a long journey, and I'm just going to take a little bit of time here to tell you the approach that we've taken. As Isabel said, she thought there may be some helpful parallels. I'm happy to take questions as we go, if you'd like. It's about 16 or so slides total, just so you can track time. So with that, let me just go ahead and get going. So San Francisco's effort really started with a report that my group prepared at the request of the mayor. This is an effort that's really started in earnest in around May of 2019. San Francisco in 2018 was experiencing sort of a culmination of a lot of challenges with PG&E. That's what inspired the conversation in the first place. The city was going to PG&E's federal regulators for relief, not getting anywhere. The board of supervisors, very frustrated, came to us and said, how do we get past this sticking point where we can't get important city projects energized in a timely way, in a cost-effective way. And so that's when we really started talking about, well, we'll put together some ideas, some alternatives. We prepared this preliminary report, that preliminary report led to us ultimately offering to purchase the grid from PG&E. So let's talk a little bit for context about who we are as an organization. The San Francisco PUC is a department of the city and county of San Francisco. San Francisco PUC operates 3 utilities, water, wastewater, and power. On the power side, we operate a publicly owned utility, Hetch Hetchy Power, and that serves the primarily city functions like powering Uni and San Francisco General Hospital and San Francisco International Airport, big facilities like that, hallmark facilities. Schools, libraries, and also some of the areas of the city that have been redeveloped recently. So like the Mission Rock area, if you've been in the city down in the southeast quadrant, you can see a lot of the older industrial areas are being converted over into sort of new green communities, and we've been involved in those efforts. We also operate Clean Power SF, which is San Francisco's community choice program. It's San Francisco's version of MCE, Marin Clean Energy, if you're familiar with that. Just provides the supply, partnership program with PG&E. PG&E does all the distribution, outage response. So unlike the publicly owned utility, we operate Hetch Hetchy Power, where in that environment. We're doing outage response, we have a call center, we do, all of the, billing and metering. So it's a fully integrated publicly owned utility that we currently operate. About 6,800 accounts, in our public utility, about 385,000 accounts in our, Clean Power SF CCA program. So in that business model, where CCA is, a partnership with PG&E, we're very dependent on PG&E's grid. So you can see here, our supply, breakdown really has the city in its Hetchy Power and Clean Power SF programs as the dominant supplier. But PG&E remains the dominant, grid operator. And it's in that area, that dependence on PG&E, where we found a lot of challenges. Historically, you see, how it's operated much like here. Customers receive their distribution services from PG&E. I imagine most customers in Bolinas receive their, electric supply from MCE. And in San Francisco, you've got that combination of Hetchy Power and Clean Power SF, coordinating with PG&E's distribution system to provide the service to our customers. We pay PG&E about $320 million a year for, use of their grid, just for our Hetchy Power program. So, over time, the city's been reducing its reliance on PG&E by making more investments in sections of the grid in San Francisco, increasing our energy independence. But we still have quite a bit of dependence on PG&E, and that's where, as I say, we encounter our difficulties. The report that we prepared really was inspired, as I say, by these increasing costs to city projects, challenges with getting important things connected, energized in a reasonable and cost-effective way. And so while we were struggling with PG&E on that, they were also facing ongoing reliability and safety challenges, financial challenges. This was right around when PG&E filed its most recent bankruptcy. So the board and our mayor asked that we put together this preliminary report we prepared that explored different service options. We broke the report into three options: limited independence, where we continue to pay PG&E for the distribution service and continue to have those arguments with their federal regulators, as I mentioned. More independence through targeted strategic investment in distribution systems that the city would own, and pay PG&E to provide service where we don't. So kind of a mix. And then full independence, which would have us paying PG&E a fair market price for their grid, becoming the owner and operator of the system serving San Francisco. So we laid out sort of a way for the decision makers to think about this, where you can see the grid considerations, what the ownership variances would mean, and really identified full independence as the one that achieves most of our goals. Public funds being used for public ownership and investment in San Francisco, decision-making control, grid control, allowing us to achieve our climate action goals more readily because we were the decision maker on grid connection issues, solar, storage, that kind of stuff. And we put it in the context of other kinds of investments that the city looked at. Water system improvements, airport improvements. The preliminary report recommended that we more fully explore acquiring the electric grid. The initial estimates that we had put together indicated that it would cost a few billion dollars. And the focus became really answering this bigger question of whether we could serve San Francisco after this purchase in a way that really met our values on clean energy content, affordability, reliable, safe service. And that's really what governed our study path as we dug a little deeper. So just breaking the big question that we asked ourselves down, you know, could we purchase the assets where the assets were transmission and distributions, assets just serving San Francisco, so within the legal boundaries of the city and county. The inventory, all the control systems, you know, what it takes to really operate the electric system is what we were proposing to purchase. Can we invest in the separation costs? The being able to separate what would remain PG&E assets from what we would be taking over if we were successful in the purchase. That means physically modifying the connections today. San Francisco's in a unique situation in that we are on a peninsula. The only part of San Francisco that is electrically connected is that southern border. So that really narrowed down how complex that construction project would be, right? Of separating the two systems. And could we provide affordable, reliable, and safe service? You know, really evaluating what the cost would be to achieve those goals. And projecting those out over a 20, 30-year horizon. And could we do that in a way that's consistent with the clean power content goals that San Francisco has, and our equity goals, while still meeting our financial requirements? So what we went ahead and did is put all of that together in basically just a big math question, right? We know we would go forward. We would not go forward with this acquisition if we expected it would cost San Franciscans more for electric service if we were the operator, right? So we set a revenue ceiling, cost ceiling, based on projections of PG&E's rates over time. And that's the box 1, that big dark black line, right? That's if you took just the revenue that PG&E collects from San Franciscans, that's what set that line over that time horizon. Then we calculated our operating costs and funded capital improvements to meet that reliable, sustainable service goal and our equity goals. That is what you see on line 2. And then all these costs have to come in below the revenue so that the acquisition is fundamentally sound. And that's what you see in 3, that blue area. We determined then that we could recover all of the costs and even save our customers over time. Not so much initially, but over time, we projected that we'd be seeing rates lower under a San Francisco ownership scenario than under a PG&E ownership scenario. And so that's when the city went forward and put together a $2.5 billion offer to PG&E. And this was really based on some extensive due diligence where we utilized publicly available information. You know, PG&E as a regulated utility has to make a lot of filings at the California PUC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission. We culled that information for information about the San Francisco section of PG&E's service operations, and we relied upon multiple experts to apply their expertise on financial services, asset appraisal, engineering, technical and regulatory issues. We have a transaction counsel and bond counsel. The funding for this project would come exclusively from the revenues achieved, the revenues we would receive as the electric service provider. So that would be a revenue bond finance transaction that we're talking about here. Hence the bond counsel. So what we determined then was the offer is a significant cash infusion to PG&E at $2.5 billion for these targeted assets that you see listed. It's not the offer we put forward to PG&E was not conditionless, right? We conditioned it on having open access to books and records so that we could really understand whether our financial work so far was accurate, taking a look inside the vaults, through the substations, really being able to assess the condition of the system so that we know how much capital improvement and investments we have to make to maintain that reliability and safe operations that we talked about earlier. And then whatever transition and other ancillary agreements we need to negotiate. And of course, we'd have to get the regulatory approvals and the city approvals. We also looked at, you know, not just our own interests, but also at what would occur, what would happen to other ratepayers. Our preliminary analysis showed that San Francisco would benefit, and that San Francisco leaving would increase other PG&E ratepayer bills very modestly, no more than $1 a month. And that the premium value we were proposing at 2.5 billion would provide some gain on sale. PG&E's regulators would be able to distribute that gain to help offset any impacts, any negative impacts we would have on PG&E's other ratepayers. And that we would continue, of course, to pay for the assets that PG&E owns that we would continue to use, the transmission system, including wildfire costs, O&M costs, vegetation management, all the major improvements on PG&E's transmission system that we would be using, we would continue to contribute towards. So other ratepayers would not be impacted that way. So that's the impact on others. We also looked at, you know, what would be the impact on the city and our general fund. I mentioned that it's a revenue funded, revenue bond funded endeavor. So it wouldn't be coming, the payment for the system wouldn't be coming out of tax dollars. It would only be coming out of ratepayer dollars. So that kind of insulated the general fund. And we were able to compensate for revenue loss if we chose out of those out of those ratepayer dollars to compensate the city for any tax losses they would see. That's a common practice within publicly owned utilities to pay the city fees that the investor-owned utility would have otherwise been contributing. And as a separately rated entity, we would not be relying on the city's credit rating, so we wouldn't be impacting the city's other borrowing. We also looked at workforce issues. San Francisco is a union town. We'd be looking to hire as many of the experienced PG&E workers as we could for operation and maintenance of the grid. They know the grid. We want to access those knowledge, skills, and abilities. And we would hope to have a transition plan negotiated with PG&E to effectuate that employment and to make sure we had a smooth handoff. We looked at risks and mitigations of those risks. That's what you see summarized here. You know, we can talk about this like this and it sounds pretty straightforward. I refer to it as being like a math equation, but in reality, this is an incredibly complex undertaking. And we had to go eyes open into what are some of those risks. You see them listed here and how we propose to mitigate and manage them early on. Then of course there are some benefits that can't be quantified in a report. Our ability to decarbonize and improve our electric mobility, achieving our electric mobility goals. Those investment dollars that I'm talking about would be invested by San Francisco in San Francisco. There wouldn't be any San Francisco dollars being exported out. We have rate making control, be able to make sure that our low income customers are getting the kind of support San Francisco felt they would need. And it would remove some of the operating risks of the CCA program business model. And so with that, I hope I've given you some insights that we can have a conversation about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna just, I don't know if you guys, want to reference specific slides or if I should bring, the video of other folks.
Or maybe just do the whole half screen. the
Yeah,
way you
half
had
screen.
before.
Barbara, when you talk about bringing on the like existing PG&E staff and operators, what is the volume of that? Is it hundreds of people, thousands of people?
No, they don't have hundreds of people working just on the San Francisco system. We wouldn't expect to have that
Okay.
many. It would be less than 100.
Okay.
And in that case, I'm really just talking about the, high voltage line worker, you know, IBW workforce.
Okay.
We would also have to bring on some additional, electrical engineering capacity as well.
Okay.
So,
Are you talking about sort of emergency repair personnel? Is that what you mean?
no,
Or-
I'm talking just day-to-day O&M.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we have some, high voltage line workers and line helpers already, on our staff, but not enough for the size of the system.
Mhm.
When you do tree management and waste foliage and things like that, do you use staff or do you contract that out to the contracted businesses?
Yeah, today we do that ourselves.
You do.
We wouldn't, most of our vegetation management responsibilities today are around the transmission lines that we own as part of our Hetch Hetchy water and power system up by Yosemite National Park. So we do most of that work on our own. We do bring crews in to supplement that during the summer. We have trail crews and other vegetation management crews that come in for the summer. But much of that is done by our own staff.
Have you done an assessment of the condition of the, I don't know, distribution system? And then second question is, I've seen a lot of overhead wires in San Francisco. Would undergrounding be, has that been talked about, and have you tried to predict the cost of that?
Yeah, so the appraisers we brought in were able to do a lot of the condition and the engineers were able to do a lot of the condition assessment based on records. So we haven't done extensive condition assessment visually. Some of the substations you can take a look at, but many of the substations in San Francisco are in enclosed buildings and we couldn't get access. PG wouldn't allow us access. So the condition assessment is really based on, years in service of the different components that are disclosed in those public documents. With respect to undergrounding, that's something San Francisco has wanted to do for decades under the program that PG&E operates under California PUC oversight. Undergrounding is something that we would like to do. It's not something we would be able to do in the first few years, but it would be something that we'd be able to fund and take on if we owned and controlled the system. That would be one of the goals.
Thanks.
Barbara, you said it would be paid by revenue. Well, who would pay setting it all up before you get revenue?
Yeah, so that would be part of the revenue bond financing package.
Okay.
We would receive the dollars from the bond holders and then repay them on the schedule once we were bringing revenue in. The city does a lot of capital improvements under that model, and so there's a lot of experience with it.
Thank you.
What kind of a time frame is there on the bond? Aren't they 20, 50 years?
Most of our bonds are 30-year bonds, and they're refinanceable. So we took this proposed transaction to the IRS and got a letter ruling from them that it would be regarded a tax exempt eligible financing. So that's how we would expect to move forward.
Go
I just
ahead.
here quickly. I think it could also be useful to understand that there's maybe different ways to finance projects like this. Like I know up in Jefferson County, which is the county that did a similar expansion that I spoke to, they use the Rural Utility Service Loan, which is a long-term loan, like 40 years or so, at a very low interest cost, to purchase their grid infrastructure. And I'm not quite sure what the difference between the bond path that Barbara is describing and what the difference is between the rural utility service loan, but it could also be useful to understand that there's many different ways to make the financing of this possible.
Yeah, and you can understand that San Francisco is not eligible to tap into those low interest loans that the rural folks Isabel's referencing are able to access. But yes, that would be another way to have a more cost effective financing structure.
And although San Francisco might not qualify for the rural utility service loans, I think Bolinas certainly qualifies as rural enough for those loans, especially in comparison to Jefferson, which is like 20 times the size of Bolinas. So I think we would be safe under that if we did decide to pursue that avenue of financing.
Sorry, 20 times geographically, not population wise. I think it's only 3,500 customers, right?
Population wise, Jefferson County, which did a similar expansion, is they have 21,000 households and 33,000 residents total.
Maybe when they, anyway, I remember reading 3,500 customers somewhere for that, maybe when they initially did it back in 2000. Anyway, no worries there. I have another question for you about PG&E and your relationship with them. I believe PG&E provides natural gas as well. So I assume that relationship will sort of continue. So customers will still be getting natural gas from PG&E, whereas you're just looking to take over the electrical.
That's right. We are only proposing to purchase electrical facilities. The city has a goal to eliminate the reliance on natural gas. But that would be by switching usage from natural gas to electricity. So
Okay.
that would be a transition that would happen naturally over time as households and businesses come into compliance with the city's objective for no natural gas, no new natural gas, perhaps.
So San Francisco's already established Hetch Hetchy, and that's producing a lot of the electricity. And I assume it's paid for. Is that true? There's no bond or anything that's being.
There's bonds for the ongoing improvements of the system. So the Hetch Hetchy water and power system was initially began construction in 1915. We started generating electricity at first in 1918. So you can imagine over the years, those facilities have had to have major capital improvements. And so we have issued new bonds, new revenue bonds to fund those new improvements. So we do have outstanding debt today.
Yeah.
It's not the original debt, but we
Right.
still have outstanding debt.
Yeah, well, I was thinking for us, so we don't have a Hetch Hetchy, we have
Right.
none. So we would have to almost independently or separately finance or figure out the cost of establishing the generation of the electricity in addition to the acquisition, isn't it right?
Yeah.
Right, you would need to purchase the supply.
Yeah,
You wouldn't have to from day one have owned generation. You would be purchasing the supply. That is how most of the most publicly owned utilities have a mix of owned and purchased generation. The community choice programs in California, like MCE, like Clean Power SF, have relied mostly on at launch on purchased generation through power purchase agreements.
so can you give me an example of who we might purchase the power from?
Oh, there's lots of different firms. Next Era is one of the largest firms selling to retail electric providers. LS Power, Constellation Energy. I'm happy to share through either Georgia or Isabel a list that the folks that routinely bid into our solicitations.
And the rates, what their charges are, is competitive with what PG&E is.
Yeah, PG&E's reaching out and procuring from the same pool of power providers. So the prices are based on, the competitive market for, the products that are available. Wind, solar, geothermal, storage, all those products can be bid. You just describe what you need and set a date for when you want to hear from them, and they all come flooding in. Our initial, bid, when we, wanted to start our CCA, Clean Power SF, we got over 70 bids for, that first package of power
Wow.
that we needed.
And
Bids from providers.
Yes, different providers,
Uh-huh.
yes.
And just to pop in quickly on that, if we wanted to align ourselves with the Bolinas community plan goals of being completely self-sufficient and independent, and also the Marin County Civil Grand Jury goals of establishing a microgrid in West Marin, I also came up with a couple cost estimates of how much that infrastructure would cost to achieve a net zero electricity grid or produce extra power so we could also sell that back to the grid. So there's a couple different options, like purchasing the power from other providers and putting in a bid for it. But then later on, perhaps we could use the excess revenue to build our own grid to, again, achieve those goals of self-sufficiency and independence. But that would obviously require much more consultation and exploration into how much that would cost and sort of the conservation concerns as well for Bolinas.
Barbara, what is it's hard to answer this question probably, but what is PG&E's like attitude towards other places buying their infrastructure? Are they like, yes, please take it? Or
No.
is it kind of like, no, we need to make this financially valuable to agree?
PG&E has not sold any of their assets to willing buyers for a number of decades.
Okay.
South San Joaquin Irrigation District has been trying to purchase the PG&E grid in their area in San Joaquin Valley for over 20 years now.
So PG&E hasn't responded to your offer?
PG&E's response to our offer has been not for sale, and if it was, it's not enough money. So that's part of the reason why we have gone to the California PUC and asked them to set a price. So the California PUC received our petition in 2020, have not made a lot of progress themselves on evaluating it. They were having some challenges with getting consulting services and such, but they recently issued a ruling setting out a series of questions for both ourselves and PG&E to answer, and starting to pick up the pace on responding to our request that they set the value. Since PG&E refused to engage with us directly, we said, okay, how can we get this going? And we thought taking it to the California PUC, since they have jurisdiction, would be a good next step. And so that's where we are now. We are also at the same time completing our California Environmental Quality Act requirements to determine what the environmental impact would be of that separation that I talked about earlier, that construction project to create two systems out of the one. And that report will be published by our planning department probably in the next month or so.
And has anybody tried to utilize the concept of eminent domain to just force PG&E to sell?
Yeah, South San Joaquin Irrigation District went forward with a eminent domain case. They were calendared to be in court in June
Of this year?
of this year. And PG&E filed at the California PUC a separate petition and appealed to the court to put off the hearing date, and they were successful in that, so. Yeah, so PG&E's general approach is to, in my experience, has been to find ways to use the regulatory environment to slow down, impede, stall efforts to have these transactions. When we first started, we did this in the context of PG&E being in bankruptcy, when they were telling everybody they needed money And we're like, okay, how
Yeah.
about 2.5 billion? But even in that environment, they weren't willing.
Okay.
Um,
I think they need money because they are trying to make a profit, which is somewhat different from what the BPUD's doing or what San Francisco's doing. So the question I was gonna ask is there, what's a recent precedent of the PUC ruling forcing Edison or PG&E or somebody to sell their assets to a municipality? Has that happened lately in California? When is it?
Not,
When has such a sale been forced? When has a utility been forced to step down?
well, so. You know, San Francisco owns its own water system because it prevailed over Crystal Springs. Became the owner of that system. That was not subject to. Was it subject to California? I guess that would have been subject to California PUC approval. The Sacramento Municipal Utility District was successful.
So they
But,
broke
you know,
up,
that
from-
was-
you know,
yeah.
that was a long time ago,
Yep.
but
that was
they broke up, that was a city though, they
Mhm.
broke up, and they broke up from PG&E or from Edison,
From PG&E,
from PG&E.
yeah.
Sea Ranch, maybe, do they have, is there some weird little tiny grid on the northwest coast?
I'm not aware of Sea Ranch owning.
You know
their
anything
own.
about this, it's about,
I don't know if Sea Ranch owns their own grid, but I
heard
could
it
look
might
into that
be
right now and get back
one
to
of
you
those
guys.
gated communities up there, anyway, I just didn't know if there's precedent of it.
There are a lot of publicly owned utilities in California. Each has their own separate story.
Yeah.
Some established themselves before PG&E had a
Got
presence.
it.
Some established themselves through, you know, an eminent domain style takeover. There are areas in PG&E service territory where PG&E just allowed another jurisdiction, be a city or other to, when they were develop their own grid and not give it to PG&E. I think one of the more recent, examples of that is, Mountain House along, Highway 5. That community is not served by PG&E, they're served by, Modesto Irrigation District, who happen to be not exactly adjacent, but close enough that they are the power provider for that town. So it's an odd mix. Like I say, each publicly owned utility has its own sort of origin story. Some that include battles with PG&E and some not.
Would you say California is a difficult place for utilities to wrest away control of these kind of things?
I think, you know, in talking with my public power colleagues across the nation, I think it's difficult everywhere. Yeah. There was an effort in Boulder, Colorado that was kind of notorious within the community of public power providers for how hard fought that effort was. There's stories from Florida. I mean, Isabel has the story of the folks up in Washington, I think, in the Pacific Northwest, yeah.
Yeah, up in Jefferson County. And if the board thinks it would be helpful to have them come in and talk about this to fully understand the process or get some more insight on the process of how hard it is sometimes to separate from the private utilities, we could also arrange that. They were actually the ones that were scheduled to come tonight, but I felt that Barbara would be able to help us understand the public power concepts more preliminarily before we pursue it more logistically.
You know, part of the commonality, it's not just a California thing, it's a for-profit entity, right? They are beholden to their shareholders, so it's they kind of have to fight, right? Or they're not doing their job for their shareholders. So
Barbara, who won in Boulder?
the utility,
And is there a comparison between what the people are paying, the ratepayers, once a municipality has taken over the system versus what they were paying to PG&E or another privately owned?
Mhm.
How does it come out?
Yeah, the publicly owned utilities across the nation typically charge their customers about 30% less than the investor-owned utilities in their areas. So typically it's, you know, meaningful savings for residents and businesses.
So it's sort of the difference between the profit and not looking to make a profit.
Yeah, and the fact that, that's a big piece of it, right? Also the fact that the, investments that are made by a public entity are tax exempt typically. Investor-owned utilities have to pay taxes, and issue debt, as taxable obligations. That business those business structure differences make it sort of a natural that it's gonna be cheaper if you're a publicly owned utility, because you're not paying shareholders, you're not paying taxes, your investments are cheaper. Your improvements in the system are cheaper over their life.
What about the difference between the investment in the infrastructure? Is there any
There are,
evaluation of how public utilities do versus? the
yeah, I
private
think the
enterprise?
performance is also improved, both from a safety and reliability perspective. The Energy Information Administration collects information from all utilities, whether they're investor-owned or you know, for-profit or not-for-profit, in the United States, and publishes that data. We're all measured using the same criteria, and when you pull that data, you can see the differences. Publicly owned utilities tend to have better safety records. Publicly owned utilities tend to have better reliability records.
And do the publicly owned utilities also get a break on materials and supplies because they are publicly owned or no? Okay.
No. In fact, some people say that the size of investor-owned utilities can make it cheaper to make some of those purchases. And publicly owned utilities have created purchasing cooperatives to help overcome that. But in reality, aren't really seeing dramatic differences in pricing.
Okay. Has more to do with the scale than anything else.
Yeah. And there's, as I say, there's techniques to address that scale issue.
Sure. Does anybody else want to chime in here?
I had another question. Would you mind going back? Maybe George, I need your help with this. The slide that showed the PG&E revenues, you know, projected through 2050, and then you were sort of showing how you would pay for this project.
Yep,
down there.
please.
Yeah, I think so. I assume that's based on, well, I shouldn't assume, I'll ask. What is that? Is that based on your sort of offer of 2.5 billion? Because how are you calculating? How
No,
are you
2.5 billion was a result of this exercise.
Okay,
Not an objective of it.
because if PG&E comes back and says, okay, we'll sell, but the price is gonna be 5 billion or 10 billion or 20 billion, then how does that change your strategy?
Yeah, so there could be a price where we wouldn't be able to envision a future where we would be charging less as
Right.
the owner. I don't think that's likely because PG&E has to demonstrate to their regulator that the price is reasonable. Unless we agreed to a crazy price like that and brought it to their regulator and said, we agree this is reasonable. You know, that wouldn't be the outcome. Yeah, so, but it could push our limits, right? Since we did our initial study, we've updated it. I think 2 times now, but PG&E's rates have gone up dramatically in the last year. So that just gives us more and more headroom to be able to afford the purchase.
One more question to clarify, something you said earlier about how the Hetchy system, how you service those customers. Did you say you have your own, I don't know if lineman is the right word, but trucks and so
Yep.
you have your own employees going around and servicing those, that infrastructure?
Yes, so a big difference between us and Bolinas is We own the Hetch Hetchy Water and Power System. We have over 160 miles of transmission and distribution assets that we already own.
That's in the city, not
In-
just from
in-
Hetch Hetchy,
We
but-
have some in the city. Most of those miles are in the Hetch Hetchy upcountry part of the system, right? But
But
we,
interject real quick. I'm her husband, right? Hetch Hetchy to Newark. Your transmission,
Mhm.
to so all the way to the Bay Area, to Fremont, and then they tie in at some station. There in in Newark, so you got transmission that goes
Right.
from
so-
the Sierra, across the valley,
Newark.
through the Coast Range to Newark.
Okay.
What the biggest said.
Yeah,
And does the city also sell some of that to other utilities? Is that-
Yes.
That's a form of revenue also, isn't it?
yes, it has been in the past. Since we started the Clean Power SF program, a lot of our extra power from the Hetchy system, we sell to that set of customers. But we have historically, yes, sold to other publicly owned utilities. And as the California market evolved and has the California ISO, is set up to allow you to sell, in a spot market, we're able to, sell any excess in that market as well. And that goes to publicly owned utilities. Yeah.
Is that a favorable rate then for the San Francisco, or is it a rate to those utilities, or?
It's a
both?
favor, it's a, when we transact directly with another utility, it's based on the market price. It's a negotiation, but the market prices are pretty transparent. We know what the current value is. There are forward price curves, services that publish all of that kind of information. That all of us rely on and hold each other accountable to having reasonable prices, right, at the negotiating table. And then the market prices that we get in the California Independent System Operator markets are market clearing prices, hour by hour. So it is as much as you're gonna be able to get for any given hour, transacting within the California ISO markets. So it's a published price.
Is the energy sold like futures, or they say we're gonna buy this number of kilowatt hours in November, this number in December, is it like that?
Yep, we buy and sell in that
Yeah.
way. Yep,
Yeah.
we buy 20 years ahead.
Wow.
Yeah.
And forgive me if I'm not understanding this, so PG&E's reluctance to let community or public power districts form is because of losing customers, or because they're not paying enough for the infrastructure? So like if Bolinas, for instance, were to build all of our new infrastructure independent of PG&E, would they then still be reticent to like hand it over? Or is it like, no, we don't want you to use our infrastructure, not just, we don't want to lose these amounts of accounts?
I think it's both.
Okay.
So it's hard to really understand exactly what's motivating them.
Yeah.
In my job, I mentioned on the Hetchy side that we serve a lot of municipal load, like the muni system, right? So all those electric buses, that's a chunk of load, that's sizable. The airport, sizable. We also serve things as simple as the bus shelters. So when you're waiting for a bus, you're under a shelter, it has some lighting and it has some advertisements. Teeny amounts of load. PG&E fights us on serving those. So there's this, I don't know, it's like it's almost like it's emotional.
Yeah.
It's difficult to
Like a
explain.
control thing.
It's a control thing.
Well,
for sure.
I would imagine from their perspective, it's sort of like a domino, right? They, because I was thinking about it in terms of serving Bolinas, what is the real revenue that they bring in here? Usually what you find in a rural district where you're serving a utility, they serve the utility because they're mandated to, because you just don't have the density to bring in revenue to, incentivize a company to actually maintain their infrastructure out here. So I think some of the economics are obviously very different in Bolinas than they would be in, you know, San Francisco. But from the perspective of, we don't want to set the precedent of this domino falling.
Yeah.
Because then what's to prevent, you know, this community from engaging, you know, you can just imagine that some of it is basically this armor ring of the system. Anyway, I mean, obviously I'm totally speculating, but
There's also the, sort of the, they don't like the contrast. Like when you're in Sacramento and you're in the public power business like I am, legislators will talk about how they enjoy SMUD's low rates, but they're responsible for PG&E customers as well. So they have this they kind of all smirk about how, yeah, you know, we get the benefit of public power, but, you know, we're making the rest of our constituents pay PG&E or Southern California Edison or SDG&E rates.
So does the PUC ultimately have to approve whatever the rates are charged, even if we were to form our own little district here?
No. If you form your own district, you're responsible for your own rate setting.
And not subject to PUC approval?
No, not subject to PUC approval. That's one of the control issues, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
In principle, because you have other options. You know, the customer would have, right now, they can buy power from MCE or from PG&E.
Yeah.
And MCE has a whole menu, you'd think PG&E would offer that too. But there's some choices, so MCE, I wish we had someone here from MCE tonight. Because they would have something to tell us, but I believe their rates have averaged in the life of that institution. Less than 1% more than PG&E, can double check with those guys, but they've been charging a very tiny bit more than PG&E for their deepest, greenest product, and they set their rate based on being a little more, but not much more than PG&E. And I don't even think that they might even be for profit, but they're not as thirsty as PG&E for profit. MCE might,
They're
are
not
they
allowed to
allowed
be for profit. They're not allowed to be for profit. They're
not
public.
or whatever, are they a public entity?
Yeah, they're a joint powers authority.
Good, so I thought they're a CCA, right?
Correct.
Community choice aggregation. This is something any size group of people in California can do, I think, and this is one of the
That should
fastest.
be a governing structure.
So you should-
You can,
Yeah, so we,
yeah, talk about these, what's
yeah,
CCA?
so San Francisco operates a CCA as well. That's our Clean Power SF program. Yep. And the main difference between a CCA and a publicly owned utility is ownership of the grid. That's the main difference. So a CCA doesn't own the grid, but is responsible for all the supply. So the CCA gets to set the rates for the supply part of your bill, what's listed as generation on your electric bill. But all the distribution charges are for our area, PG&E charges regulated by the California PUC. So you don't have control over that component.
But we could enter into a joint powers agreement with other utility districts in the area, then could we?
Yes,
Yeah, so I was just thinking. Two, just don't use PG&E.
yeah, and so some of the other publicly owned utilities in the Bay Area are Healdsburg,
Okay,
Alameda Municipal Power, so the island of Alameda generates and provides their own electricity. City of Palo Alto, City of Santa Clara, they operate Silicon Valley Power, one of the largest publicly owned utilities in California. Publicly owned electric utilities because they have such large data center loads. Who am I missing? I'm feeling like I'm forgetting someone.
where does Healdsburg get their source of power?
They are a member of the Northern California Power Authority. And they do bulk purchasing through that joint power authority. They have some ownership interests in power plants that the Northern California Power Authority has established. And then they do purchasing in the open market, just like I was describing earlier.
And how long have they been a public utility?
Ooh, I don't remember. I don't remember how old they are.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think they might be grandfathered in because of the geysers.
The geysers contribute to their power source.
Possibly.
I don't believe Healdsburg has any ownership in
No.
the geysers,
Well, maybe not.
yeah,
More like Lake County maybe or somebody.
yeah.
Right.
Calpines, guys
I'm
are.
thinking of guys that don't.
Did you ever hand up?
Interesting stat to throw out here. This is from an article that Isabel sent around. Around the country, around 2,000 consumer-owned utilities serve more than 50 million customers in places like Sacramento, Long Island, and the entire state of Nebraska. So, good. So there's a little nugget for you to consider. 50 million people get their power from 2,000 different small utilities, or
Yeah.
utilities of different sizes, I guess.
Yeah. There's an association by the name of the Association of Public Power, American Public Power Association, that allows us an opportunity to kind of work together. And they publish a lot of good data like that. California's version of that is the California Municipal Utilities Association, so they're another good resource.
Go ahead, Zach.
Question for Isabel. Do you know what utility Jefferson County was dealing with? And when did they transfer over?
Yeah, they were working with PSE, which is Puget Sound Energy, and they begun their process in 2008, right after the first Barack Obama election. And they were able to sort of metaphorically and literally flip the switch on their power provider and their distribution system in 2013. So it took them sort of an unusually fast period of time of just 5 years, but they had a lot of things that were sort of working in their advantage that helped them make this process happen rather quickly. But then there was also two sister counties to Jefferson County that tried to do the same thing but failed. So I think that sort of emphasizes that even though they were able to do it in just 5 years, the other two surrounding counties were not able to do it at all. So it is sort of you can't really predict how these things will turn out for sure.
Thank you. Well, is there anything else that we would, go ahead.
One more, on an earlier slide, you don't have to pull it up, George, it's okay. I think you said that 10% of San Francisco customers generate their own electricity. Is that, so my
10% I think was direct access.
yeah, does that mean solar or?
No.
No,
What that means is the state of California allowed large commercial customers to make their own long-term power purchase deals or power purchase deals with all those competitive providers I was talking about.
okay,
The Constellation Energies, the Next Era, those folks. That's a program that at one point in time was open to residents as well. But then we had the energy crisis, the Enron energy crisis, all those entities that were providing service to residential customers threw them back to the investor-owned utilities, stopped providing the service. And so the state decided that being able to make that direct purchase decision through the direct access program should be limited to just large commercial customers who could, sort of fend for themselves in that kind of topsy-turvy competitive market. So about 10% of San Francisco large commercial customers are in the direct access program. Doing their own supply deals like the CCA does for the rest of the businesses and residents.
What's an example of like a company that sits in that bucket?
Microsoft, Amazon, Salesforce, some of the hospitals are large loads that do that. Safeway Corp throughout California was in the direct access program. Recognizable large businesses.
Thanks. Do you think we have a chance to break away?
Do you have the stamina? Like Isabel said, 3 counties near each other, 2 failed, one prevailed. I think, when I've asked the same question, some of my public power colleagues who succeeded, what do you think? What are the odds for San Francisco? What's the recipe that makes it work? I think the recipe that makes it work is being clear on what's motivating you. For San Francisco, it's that controlling our own destiny. When I talk to San Franciscans, they're like anybody but PG&E. They're willing to pay, they even tell me, we'll pay more if we can just get rid of them and we can just go to City Hall when we have a problem, right?
Right.
That retail, that really more close proximity and, talking to your neighbor as opposed to some amorphous corporation, has a lot of value, when I talk to residents. Another piece of so that's, knowing what your goal is, right? Having the political will. And that comes in part from a constituency, an electorate that's behind you, that supports you, that's pushing you, really, not just supporting you, but pushing you to do it, holding you accountable. I think those are the main things. I've seen some communities state their goal and have PG&E come in and say to the politicians, we'll meet that goal for you. Here's how we'll do that for you. And it kind of takes the steam out of the effort. But if it met the goal, because PG&E changed their ways, I guess that's a win, right? It just depends on where your community is. San Francisco over the years, over many decades, has talked about public power. This is the one, and usually it has come from third parties putting it on the ballot in San Francisco, not San Francisco government putting it on the ballot, right? This is the first time where the policymakers themselves, the mayor, the elected city attorney, the unanimous board of supervisors all said, we need to do this. So we have, or had, that was before the most recent election, very clear statements, adopted resolutions, written letters, people really, the elected saying, this is what we're gonna do. And when we poll the voters in San Francisco, 78% say they want us to do this. So it feels like, we've got, I think right now, we've got the recipe, if we can hold that political will, but you folks need to say, what is your goal in doing this? And do you have the backing and pushing of your constituents, the political will to make it happen?
I think we have the political will, it's whether the dollar adds up to make sense for the community to do it.
Right.
I think the idea of getting PG&E out and getting the profit motive out of producing electricity for our community is, a driving force.
Mhm.
But it has to make sense economically for the people to support it.
I got a really good question. Does the PUC have one set of funds for the 3 different products that you have, water, sewer, and power? Does one department subsidize another and such? Are they all separate?
All separate.
Because my thought for how Bolinas being able to produce its own power was, wouldn't it be great if we could, instead of making a profit, subsidize the support of the sewer system and the water system? Because there's a bunch of money, add a few zeros to how much money is, move the decimal over a couple spots for how much money the BCPUD's handling, just through a CCA, just through doing, without owning a wire, just through offering a product, a paper product of electricity. You could buy it from whoever, from MCE. I think 80% of Bolinas is on MCE right now, which is a great sign about our political will for such a thing. Know where their dog is in this race at all, but I don't think it hurts them. I don't think it takes their customer, because anyway, that's the homework assignment is CCA.
Well, if Bolinas's goal was just to have a cleaner electric supply, then MCE is providing that.
Yeah.
They are, but it'd be great to have a place for both the BCPUD to plug in some solar arrays and wind farms, and have that not be owned by MCE, and have it be owned by perhaps local investors, perhaps put together out of a bit at a time from the fund the BCPUD already manages, who knows? but as inside of the economy as possible. This could probably fund the thing, do it a little at a time. And like Barbara said, that we would start with where we are now, buying the electricity from other providers, and the town's mostly buying from MCE anyway. And then slowly infusing it with doubling and tripling the solar arrays at on the BPUD properties, which there's plenty of room to do, putting in some wind farms or whatever it is that the environmentalists and the community wants to do, whatever it is that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's room for that, just without battling PG&E, there's a lot of room to develop it. And BPUD could start having an electricity product without having a single lineman on the crew. You could just sell it the way MCE does and start with that, and then start developing production assets a little at a time. I'm looking at that possibility.
Well, is there anything else that you want to ask Barbara? Thank you very much. It's a great
Thank you.
presentation and very informative.
Well, thanks for having me. Isabel
Yes.
connected us, so thanks, Isabel.
Yeah.
And you know, while I work for San Francisco, I live in Marin County, and we have property here in Bolinas.
Oh, you do?
And I should point out, as far as, again, you're not telling your credentials for CCA and all that as well. I mean, if you want
Well, I talked about the Clean Power SF
to,
program.
yeah, but also in the board of CCA, so you kind of,
Oh,
you know the
okay.
ins and outs of the CCA.
Yeah,
yeah.
So you're kind of a.
We can talk about that
you
offline.
go- Yeah.
Yeah, very exciting.
Well, what would you
Do you,
suggest we?
Do you talk to other small districts, or are you, is this part of what you do to sort of proselytize?
I wouldn't say I'm out there seeking opportunities to proselytize, but you know, the public power community, local government, very supportive of each other, right? When we have questions, we know we can reach out to colleagues, and so, you know, just this morning I was on the phone with South San Joaquin Irrigation District, and I'm on the board of the California Municipal Utilities Association. We get together regularly to understand the challenges and help each other with solutions. So it's just part of local government, right? We help each other out.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, what should we do from this point forward? Any ideas?
I'd like to hear from the Jefferson County folks at some point about what they did, but
And how it's going, you know,
Yeah, and how it's
15
going.
years later, and what their rates are like.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can definitely set that up. I spoke with both Will O'Donnell, who has been there since the transition started in 2008, and Bill Wise, who was the community activist that was very instrumental in sort of the political motivations that we discussed is so important in making this transition happen. And they were both willing and eager to come present, but I felt that it was important to sort of understand what the public power concept was before sort of jumping into how it's been done before. And so they can definitely present. And then another person that I feel would be very helpful to have present is somebody that Bill Wise connected me with, who is Crispin Hollinsted. And he has been living in Ukiah for the last 13 years, where they have a municipal power system, sort of like what Bolinas would be expanding to. And it's the only one in Mendocino County. So he's sort of involved with the functionality of something that's already doing what we would be doing as well in California to sort of provide the regional context. And he's also great because he is on the Citizens Advisory Board for Sonoma Clean Power, which is a regional community choice aggregate, sort of like Marin Clean Energy. So I think he could also help give us that sort of like pros and cons analysis between perhaps working with the CCA or perhaps that process of municipalization and expanding BPUD to include power. So those are three people I think would be sort of helpful to speak with to sort of further our understanding of this idea.
Maybe somebody from Healdsburg also. I'd be interested because that's a smaller community. It's not too far away from us. And might have more comparable population than Jefferson, where they have 35,000 or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. An interesting thing though about Jefferson County, before they did their transition, they only had 8 board members, which is kind of a similar size to where you guys are at right now. Even though they have a much larger district, of course. And then I put this in the chat. I'm not sure if anybody saw it because I don't know how it's displaying on your guys' end, but I could also connect you guys with Sebastian Kahn, who is Marin Clean Energy's senior community development manager. And I spoke to him like maybe like last September, but he introduced me to a lot of programs that Marin Clean Energy has for microgrids in Marin. And he said that he would work with the board if this is before I even presented to you guys about helping fund some of these smaller projects to have more renewable generating capacity in Bolinas. And then also just to remind you guys, I did do some of the numerical analysis of how much it would cost to get Bolinas over the net zero electricity grid threshold based off of the town's current electricity consumption and historical consumption over the last 10 years. If you want me to send that to the chat again, I totally can, if that helps provide more context.
That'd be great.
So Georgia, what do you think about how we proceed from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to you. I think that the special meeting format works. I think there's people that expressly came here to discuss this subject, so that's what I would urge us to do. As opposed, it's a fairly long discussion, and if somebody's coming here to present, I feel like you want to give it its due diligence, so I'd recommend instead of embedding it into our sometimes marathon meetings, we treat it as its own entity.
I agree with that.
So maybe create an agenda for the next meeting, incorporating some of the people that we all just been talking about, or concept. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely looking to Isabel to like take the lead on this, because I mean, to be totally candid, I don't have the bandwidth to like, investigate all of this.
No,
And obviously it's her passion and subject matter expertise at this point, so I will, communicate with her after the meeting, and we can come up with a plan for what the next, what would be fruitful in the next meeting.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Here's a question for maybe both of you, Isabel and Barbara. It seems like when these communities such as ours, if we were to pursue this, one of the first steps would be to do a feasibility study. At what point generally do communities undertake, do such a study, and is there funding available through, I don't know, like how would we fund such a grant, and what sort of, how much are we talking? Isabel, do you have an idea about that?
So I don't know how the size comparison would work, but when I was speaking to Jefferson County about their next steps, they definitely recommended getting a consultant, and the company that they worked with was D. Hiddle. And I don't think he gave me a specific cost on it, but it's all publicly available information, and I can look into their records to see how much they spent on their consultancy fees and try to estimate from there how much it would cost for Bolinas, which is obviously smaller, and probably a smaller undertaking as well. But he did emphasize to me in our conversation that it's important for public agencies to get consultants so they can sort of cover their behinds, so to speak, if anything goes awry, and they can just point to the consultancy and be like, oh, it was that consultant who led us astray. So I think that that's definitely helpful and necessary. And just being totally frank, I would love to help out with that, but I also recognize my own sort of bandwidth as a student straight out of college, and I'm still learning a lot about this, and I think that it would be really useful to go, if you do decide to pursue this through a similar company like D. Hiddle, who will be able to give more concrete policy recommendations on this. But I can definitely help you guys explore the concept more and set you up with somebody who seems like a good consultant from one of these companies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. What do you say, Andrew? Do you have any final thoughts here?
No, I think we just continue looking into it, and we schedule a meeting when it seems like the time is right. We don't need to schedule it right now.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Georgia, so we'll just sort of pass the baton back to you and
Okay.
work with her and set something up.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, Barbara.
So we have, our agenda says community expression. Anybody have an item to talk about that's not the one that we just discussed? I guess there isn't any, so I'll say the meeting is adjourned.
Cool. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Isabel, for putting this together.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I really enjoyed listening to Barbara's presentation. I think that that was really informative and really helped ground the concept of public power to Bolinas' context. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next steps are and hearing what other people have to say about this potential transition, this new opportunity.
Yeah.
Bye, Tom.
I might not be around. Oh, I'll get it.
Over now?
Yeah.
Over and out.
It's hard to imagine San Francisco disentangled from PG&E. They're like one